Okay, last lesson we looked at expanding brackets like this. X plus 2 times x plus 3 is x squared plus 5x plus 6, as you can see there. Okay, now, here we expanded a binomial, product of binomials. Here we've got 3 terms on the right, and it's called a trinomial. So the expression on the right is a trinomial, and it's called a quadratic trinomial because a quadratic, so trinomial obviously means 3 terms, trinomial, 3 numbers or terms. The reason it's a quadratic is because the highest power here on the right hand side, you've got x squared plus 5x plus 6. Your highest power of x here is 2. So that's the definition of the quadratic. So in general, a quadratic trinomial, so quadratic means your highest power is x squared, and trinomial 3 terms. Okay, so that's a quadratic trinomial. Now the general form of a trinomial is this: ax squared plus bx plus c, where a, b and c are just numbers, generally whole numbers. Okay, where a, b and c are, I'm going to put integers actually. Now, but the a can't equal 0, otherwise you wouldn't have an x squared term. A can't equal 0, and if we want a monic trinomial, monic 1, mono 1, what we're going to be doing today, we're going to be factoring quadratic trinomials if the a is a 1. So we're just doing ones like x squared plus 5x plus 6. Not 5x squared plus something. They're harder to do. So in year 9, we're just doing the monic type, not the other type. Okay? So here, a is the leading coefficient. It's the coefficient of the x squared. Why is it called leading? Not only because it's the first one. That's actually not the reason. It's because the highest power is x squared. So when you write trinomials, you always write highest power x squared, then the x term, then the constant. You know, everything's got protocol. Like when you're writing 2ABC, we don't write 2BCA. It's got to be alphabetical order. With trinomials, highest power first, then the next power, then the lowest power. Now C has the lowest power because it's basically got no power. It's just a constant. So the constant term has no x. B is the coefficient of the x, A is the coefficient of the x squared. It's called the leading coefficient because x squared is the highest power. Now today, we're going to factorize, and it's the opposite of expanding. So, factorizing a quadratic trinomial means we've got to change it back to the bracket form that we were doing last lesson. Okay? And when we factorize quadratic trinomials, if a is 1, they're the easiest type to do. Okay? Now, if a equals 1, this is your quadratic trinomial. It'll be x squared, because the a is 1, plus bx plus c. Now, what we need to do is find 2 numbers so that the same two numbers have to multiply to give c, the constant, but add up to give b, the coefficient of the x. So I always look at my constant term, all right? And I need 2 numbers, for example, in this one, 2 numbers that multiply to give 6. Now, you've got 2 possibilities. 3 times 2, actually, you've got more. 6 times 1. Now, we're going to look at this very first type. See how everything's positive? X squared plus 5x plus 6. This is the easiest type. It means, how do we get 2 numbers that multiply to give 6? It's either positive 3 times positive 2, or it could be negative 3 times negative 2. Or it could be 6 times 1, or negative 6 times negative 1. But when everything in your trinomial has pluses in between, you don't have to worry or consider any negatives at all. Everything will be positive. So 2 numbers that multiply to give 6. 3 times 2, because everything's positive here, or 6 times 1. So they both multiply to give 6. That's great, but let's add them together, which when I add those numbers together, I need to get 5, not 7. Got the idea? So I'm going to choose 3 and 2. So two numbers that multiply to give 6 but add up to give 5 would be 2 and 3. So how do I factorize? I go, it's always going to be x plus something, or x minus something, or plus minus, minus plus. We're going to do all the combinations today, but we're starting with the easiest type, plus plus. So we know the numbers are 2 and 3. It's going to be x plus 2, x plus 3, and you can check it. Let's expand. X squared plus 3x plus 2x plus 6. The 3x and the 2x add up to give 5x. So that's good. Got the idea? Now, I'll just pause because I want to do, no, computer's frozen. This one's a bit harder. I need two numbers that multiply to give -6. Now, there will actually be, but add up to give -5. Well, I'm going to list them all here. I could have -6 times +1, couldn't I? Look, just think 6. You've got 6 times 1 and 3 times 2, basically. But -6, you could have -6 times +1 or 6 times -1. Actually, I'm not even going to put the times there. I'm just going to put them. Wait. I could have 3 times -2 or -2 times 3. Do you get that? That the way I can get -6 as a product is -6 times 1, 6 times -1, 3 times -2, or -2 times 3. What you do, you start off with 6. We know it's 6 times 1, 3 times 2. But -6, one of them's got to be negative. -6 times 1, 6 times -1. 3 times -2 or -2 times 3. This all happens in your head. You think about it. But then you say, I need to add these two numbers now to get -5. Together will give you, now 1 is +1, all right? I've got -6 times +1, +6, -1. So let's add them together now. What's -6 plus 1? -5. What's 6 minus 1? +5. What's 3 minus 2? 1. -2. Well, I did them the same. That's negative, that's positive. What's the last one? All right, which one do I need? The first one. We're going to do a whole lesson on this. All right, so if you're confused at the moment, don't worry. So girls, the two numbers that multiply to give -6, now I'm off screen, but add up to give -5 are the first ones. So in your brackets, you write x plus 1, x minus 6. Now, who's done crisscross method? You can write them in a cross, but let's just leave that. The idea of this whole thing is to find two numbers that multiply to give a number but add up to give another number. Okay? So, for example, I want two numbers, mn means m times n. I want two numbers that multiply to give 2 but add up to give 3. What do you think those two numbers are? +2, +1. I'm going to put pluses and minuses in front of these. What's 2 times 1? What's 2 plus 1? So your numbers are 2 and 1. Does that make sense? What about 12? Two numbers that multiply to give 12. Notice these are positive. What have you got? Well, we've got 6 and 2, but that adds up to give what? 8. That's no good. 4 and 3, and they're both positive. Does that make sense? And 4 plus 3 is 7. That's good. So girls, when everything's positive here and positive there, that's the easiest type. But sometimes I need two numbers that multiply to give -4 here, but add up to give 0. Well, girls, there's only two possibilities of what times what is 4. What are they? 2 times 2, and what's the other possibility? Oh, I know the negatives. Just give me pure numbers. Don't give me signs yet. What times what is 4? 2 times 2 is 4, or 4 times 1 is 4? Do you think there is any way, girls, one of them's got to be positive, one's got to be negative? 2 and -2. If you add them together, what do you get? 0. One's if I did 4 and -1. Is there any way you can combine 4 and 1 no matter which one's negative or positive. See, when I say 4 times 1 is 4, I don't think in the beginning, is it positive, is it negative? What I do, I add the 4 and 1 and get 5, and I subtract them and get 3. There's no combination ever of 4 and 1 that's going to give you 0. So I disregard the 4 and 1. But then I look at the 2 and 2, and I say if I added 2 and 2, I'd get 4, and if I subtracted them, I'd get 0. So there's a possibility with the 2 and 2. There's no way you can combine 4 and 1, and there are several ways you can combine them. There's just no way you'd ever get 0. You'd either get 5 if you add, or 3 if you subtract, negative 3 if one of the negative 4 is if the 4 is the negative, etc. All right? So we disregard the 4 and the 1. So when you choose your numbers, you add them, you subtract them in your head, you say, no way I'm going to get 0. No way. Disregard those. But the 2 and 2, if I add them, I get 4. If I subtract 2 and 2, I get 0. We know that one of them needs to be negative. So first work your numbers out and then work the sign out. I never work the sign out first. Because girls, if you're working with a factor like 24, you've got 24 and 1, 12 and 2, 4 and 3. No, not 4 and 3. 24. 4 and 6, 8 and 3. Imagine doing plus minus, plus minus. What you've got to do is not do that. You've got to think of all the combinations that make the 24. Don't worry about signs. Are you going to get 11 or something, which is what you might want? Pick the combination that might give you that. All right? Okay, so girls, what's 2 plus negative 2? 0. So your numbers here are 2 and negative 2. Girls, I need two numbers, be very careful, that multiply to give 2. There's only 2 and 1, but they have to add up to give negative 3. Now, girls, a positive times a positive is a positive, and a negative times a negative is a positive. So it's got to be negative 2 and negative 1. Does that make sense? Negative 2 times negative 1 is 2. Negative 2 plus negative 1 is negative 3. Okay, so girls, just because the two numbers multiplied are positive doesn't mean both numbers are positive. All right, what about this one? Think of the factors of 10. Just 2 and 5. Do you reckon 2 and 5 can somehow give you 3? Yeah, that's your combination. Let's say you thought 10 and 1. Are they ever going to give you 3? No, they're going to give you 11 if you add them, or 9 if you subtract. So forget 10 and 1. It's out of the picture. Now, I need plus 3. So I've got 5 and 2. You want a positive answer at the end, plus 3? I have more pluses than minuses. Plus 5 minus 2. It's as simple as that. First, look at the multiplication. Sometimes you're going to have 5 options to choose from. To narrow down your options, add them, subtract them. Don't worry about signs. Once you've got the combination that will give you the 3, it's positive 3. I need more positives than negatives. Plus 5 minus 2. Got the idea? So it's 5 plus minus 2, or the other way around, doesn't matter. Now, negative 18. Give me the combinations. What times tables give you 18? 6 and 3 will give you that. If you thought 9 and 2, that can only give you what two numbers, 9 and 2? It can give you 7 if you subtract, and 11 if you added them. It's not going to be 9 and 2. You're trying to get a 3. It's definitely 6 and 3. Now, your addition has to be negative. So do you need more negatives than positives? Minus 6 plus 3. Do you get what I'm doing with this? When I add them together, I want negative 3. I need more negatives than positives. The first thing, girls, narrow down your multiplication. Let me tell you, with 18, I could have chosen 18 and 1. That's going to give me 19 or 17. I could have done 6 and 3. If you add them, you get 9. If you subtract, you get 3. Bingo. I could have done 9 and 2. Add them, 11, and subtract them, 7. No, that's not going to work. So choose your numbers first. Don't even worry about which one's negative, positive. Just make sure your combination can give you that number, then decide which one's negative, which one's positive. All right? So we got minus 6 plus 3 is negative 3. Now, look at this one. Girls, if you get the positive types, you're laughing. Everything's positive. Okay? So, Write down the leading coefficient. What's the leading coefficient? The value of the leading coefficient. A is 1. What's the coefficient of x? So that's the coefficient of the x squared. What's the coefficient of x? 9, good. And what's the constant? Plus 20. So find the number. What two numbers multiply to give 20? You can tell me. 5 and 4, 10 and 2, 20 and 1. Which one is going to give you 9? When you add them, which possibility? So 20 we got 5 times 4. 20 we've got 10 times 2. That's out. 10 times 2 is out. So's 20 times 1. Definitely out. There's no way that can give 9. There's no way this can give 9. It can give 8 if you subtract, but it can't give 9. Got it? Definitely this is my thing. So I just need plus 5 and plus 4. They will multiply to give 20 and they will add up to give positive 9. Does that make sense? So factorize it. X plus 5, x plus 4. X squared plus 9x plus 20. Right, this one. Negative leading coefficient, A is 1. What's coefficient of x? And the constant. Let's go. Coefficient of the x? Negative 4. Constant? Negative 21. Right, give me all the numbers that multiply to give 21. Well, it's got to be 3 times 7. But, yeah, we got 3 times 7, but girls, they've got to add up to give negative 4. Do you want more minuses or pluses? Constant. As in constants. Constant. There, A. Girls, definitely it's going to be 7 times 3. 21 for sure, because it can give 4. But do you want more pluses or minuses? I need them to add up to give negative 4. You need more negatives than positives. Positive 3, negative 7. So positive 3 times negative 7 gives you negative 21.
What is the one if we do negative 3 plus?
That will be wrong. You'll end up with plus 4x in the middle. I'll show you in a minute. We're going to do a whole heap of them. So, A is the number in front of the x squared. It's 1. Coefficient, yeah. Leading coefficient is 1. There's nothing in front of the x squared, so it's 1x squared. Trinomial is always written in the form ax squared plus bx plus c. A is the value in front of the x squared. In this case, A is 1. Okay? All right. So factorize it. What do you get? Girls, what do we get? X plus 3, x minus 7. Let's check. To check, you expand. X squared minus 7x plus 3x minus 21. Do you see that? If I expand x squared minus 7x plus 3x minus 21 minus 4x plus 3x, yep, that will give me minus 4x. But if you go plus 7 minus 3, that gives you plus 4 here. All right? So, factorizing monic, quadratic, trinomial expressions. Monic meaning the number in front of the x squared is 1. Trinomial, 3 terms. Quadratic, x squared. To factorize something of this form, remember that A is 1, we just need 2 numbers that multiply to give the C, and the same 2 numbers have to add up to give B. Note the following. This will help you a lot. If C, that 1 on the end, is a positive, the signs in the factorized expression will be the same as each other. In other words, they'll be plus plus or minus minus. Because 2 positives if you multiply 2 positives, you get a positive. And if you multiply 2 negatives, you also get a positive. So that's really important. However, if the constant on the end, so for example, the first 4 questions, girls, see how that's plus, 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 plus? I'll tell you now, in your brackets, you've got pluses. Because there's no negative there. There's going to be no negative. See this second one, plus, plus, it's going to be plus, plus. But the next one, see how the constant is positive? It's either got to be 2 positives or 2 negatives. You need to look carefully. So if the constant is positive and the other term is positive, you've got 2 positives in your brackets. If the constant's positive, like in these 2, but the middle term, the B term, is negative, you've got 2 negatives, because a negative times a negative will give you the positive here, but then you've got to add up 2 things to get a negative. They've got to be both negative. See what I'm doing? Now, same with this one. The 2 numbers multiply to give a positive, but add up to give a negative. You've got negative, negative in both brackets. Let's just work on those 4 now. Okay, so girls, always look at your constant term. If it's positive, you've got 2 positives or 2 negatives. How do you decide? You look at the middle term. Well, if there's no negatives at all, everything's positive. Okay? All right, girls, what 2 numbers multiply to give 6 but add up to give 5? It's definitely 3 and 2. Plus 3 plus 2. So 3 times 2 is 6. 3 plus 2 is 5. What 2 numbers multiply to give 21 but add up to give 10? 7 times 3, they're positive. 7 plus 3, they're both positive, gives 10. Now you can put x plus 7, x plus 3, or x plus 3, x plus 7, doesn't matter. This one, what 2 numbers multiply to give 14? Well, we definitely got 7 and 2, but negative 7, negative 2. Because negative 7 times negative 2 is positive 14. Negative 7 and plus negative 2. 7 minuses and 2 minuses give me 9 minuses. So negative 7 plus negative 2 gives me negative 9. This one as well, girls, the answer, the constant's positive. So it's got to be 2 positives or 2 negatives. So what's it going to be? 10 and 3. It's not 15 and 2, because 15, oh, actually it might, no, it's definitely 10 and 3, because if they're both negative, girls, you get minus 13. What happens if it's 15 and 2? Minus 15 minus 2 gives you what? Minus 17. So girls, that's a tricky one. So the 10 and 3, you might think, yeah, that's going to work, but 15 and 2 could work as well, because 15 minus 2 is 13. But because you're multiplying to give positive 30, they both have to be negative, and negative times a negative is a positive. So it's negative 10 times negative 3 is 30, negative 10 minus 3, or negative 10 plus minus 3 is negative 13. And that's a tricky one. All right, girls, now over here. If your constant is negative, then the signs in the factorized expression are different to each other. So you're going to have a plus, then a minus, or a minus and then a plus. So we've got to decide. Give me 2 numbers that multiply to give 20. Don't worry about signs yet. 10 and 2 or 4 and 5. Could 4 and 5 ever give you 8? But 10 and 2 can, so we go with that. 10 and 2. Now look at your plus 8. Do you want more pluses or minuses to get plus 8? More pluses, less negatives. So I want x plus 10, x minus 2. Do you get the idea? So you work out the numbers that multiply. Again, 2 numbers that multiply to give 6. Girls, that's a negative 6. So one's got to be positive, one's got to be negative. Be careful with this one, because you've got 6, 1 and 3, 2. But 6, 1 can give 5, 3, 2 can give 5, but 3, 2 may not give 5 if they're both different signs. See how the signs have to be different? Let's try 6, 1. Girls, you want it to add up to give plus 5x. One of them's got to be positive, one's got to be negative. Plus 6 minus 1. Because plus 6 times negative 1 is negative 6, and then adding them plus 6, 6 pluses, 1 minus, gives 5 pluses. Girls, if you try, let's say you tried 3 and 2, right? That's an obvious one to choose as well. But one of them's got to be negative. Minus 3 plus 2, that gives negative 1. 3 minus 2, that gives positive 1. Doesn't give positive 5. So I've got x plus 6, x minus 1. The next one, 18. Think of the factors of 18, but they have to give 7. Well, 6 and 3 can give 9, or 6 and 3 can give 3. It's not that. It's got to be 9 and 2. One of them's got to be negative. See, 9 and 2 can give 11, or 9 and 2 can give 7 if you subtract. Do you see? Well, you need more minuses. No. Minus 9 plus 2 will give you minus 7. Does that? You want a minus 7. When you're looking at your negative and your positive, when you put them together, you need more negatives. So I've got x minus 9, x plus 2. It doesn't matter if I wrote it as x plus 2, x minus 9. The last one, 24. Now, this is the one that gives me heaps of combinations.
10 and 6.
But it's not going to be 6 and 4. You know why? Because, 6 and 4 can give 10, but if you try it, let's try it. One's got to be negative, one's got to be positive. It's not going to work. It's either going to be negative 2 or positive 2. That's not going to work. So it can't be 6 and 4. Yet, let's try 12 and 2. One's got to be negative, one's got to be positive. Do you want more negatives or positives? Minus 10x. Minus 12. Because, that's okay. So minus 12 plus 2. So girls, see how some of them like 24 are really tricky. 24, you've got 12 and 2. You've got 8 and 3. You've got 6 and 4. You've got to decide which one before you start. Don't start putting 8 and 3. 8 and 3 will give you 5, or 8 and 3 will give you 11. Forget it, it's out. Do you get it? 24 and 1 will give you 23, or 24 and 1 will give you 25. It's out. Don't even consider it. Okay, the bell's about to go. So you'll be doing these. If you want, just go straight to the, don't worry about the last page. I'll do that next lesson. I'll set some homework.